Have you ever found yourself waiting for a grand, undeniable miracle during your darkest moments, only to feel like your hopes remain buried? The following narrative takes us back to the very evening of the resurrection to reveal a profound truth. The most significant moments of divine recognition often do not come with thunder or spectacle. Instead, they arrive in disguise, walking quietly beside us in our grief, waiting patiently for a simple invitation to stay. This is the story of how an ordinary meal in a poorhouse changed human history, and why it might change how you see the ordinary moments in your own life.
There is a house in a village 7 miles outside Jerusalem. It is evening. Two people who buried their hope 3 days ago have invited a stranger inside for the night because the road is dangerous after dark, and the man has been good company. They do not know who he is. He sits down at their table. He picks up a piece of bread, and within seconds, he is gone, and they are running back out into the dark, back toward the city they just left, to tell the most important news in human history. What happened in those few seconds at that table? We will get there, but first you need to understand what kind of day this has been, because the first thing the resurrected Jesus does after walking out of a tomb that should have held him forever is not part company with thunder. It is not angels singing in the sky over Jerusalem. It is not a triumphant march through the temple courts to confront the people who killed him. It is dinner. He sits down at an ordinary table in a poor house with two grieving people who do not yet know who he is. And that is where the most important revelation of the resurrection takes place. This is the story of the first meal Jesus shared after he rose from the dead, and why it changes the way you should think about how he shows up in your life. It is the evening of the same day the tomb was found empty. Two disciples are walking away from Jerusalem. One is named Cleopas. Luke gives us his name specifically, though he leaves the other companion unnamed. And the tradition has wondered for 2,000 years whether it might have been Cleopas's wife, walking the road home with her husband on the worst weekend of their lives. They have heard the reports. Women went to the tomb that morning and found it empty. Angels, actual angels, dazzling, terrifying, told them Jesus was alive. But Luke records something painfully honest about how the rest of the disciples received this news. Their story seemed like nonsense. So these two are walking home, 7 miles, talking, debating, trying to reconcile what they watched happen on a Roman cross on Friday with what some hysterical women are now claiming on Sunday morning. Their hope died 3 days ago. They watched it die. They watched the nails go in and the stone roll across the entrance and the soldiers seal it shut. And whatever this report from the women means, it has not yet reached the place in them where grief still lives. And while they are walking and debating, Jesus himself draws near and walks with them. But their eyes are prevented from recognizing him. Stay with me on that detail, because it is one of the strangest and most consistent features of every resurrection appearance in all 4 Gospels. Mary at the tomb mistakes him for the gardener. The disciples on the shore do not recognize him until the miraculous catch of fish. Something about the risen body of Jesus is both fully himself and somehow different, recognizable eventually, but not automatically. Not at first glance. You have to get close. You have to stay long enough. He asked them a simple question. What are you discussing as you walk along? They stop. They look downcast. Luke's word choice here is almost cinematic. The physical posture of grief, shoulders dropped, eyes on the road instead of the horizon. And Cleopas, perhaps a little incredulous that this stranger does not already know, says, "Are you the only person in Jerusalem who has not heard what happened?" And then they tell him everything: the arrest, the trial, the crucifixion, the hope that died with it, the report from the women, the disbelief of the other disciples. Notice what Jesus does first. He does not interrupt. He does not correct them in the first sentence. He does not say, actually, I am right here. Look at me. He lets two grieving people pour out their entire account of his own death to his own face, without revealing himself, without rushing them, without making the moment about the relief he could give them by simply removing his disguise. He listens first. Here is what most people miss about this. The resurrected Jesus, the one who has already defeated death, who already knows exactly how this story ends, still walks 7 miles letting two people grieve in front of him before he says anything that might change how they feel. He does not skip the grief to get to the good news. He walks through it with them first. Only after they have said everything does he speak. And what he says is not gentle in the way you might expect. How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. It is a rebuke, but a rebuke wrapped entirely in invitation, because what follows, it is not a scolding, it is a Bible study. Luke records that beginning with Moses and all of the prophets, Jesus explains to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. This is one of the most remarkable things in the entire New Testament, and it is easy to read past it. The risen Christ, standing, walking, alive, in front of two of his own followers, chooses to spend their time together, not performing a miracle to prove who he is, but teaching them how to read their own scriptures so they will recognize him themselves. He could simply say, "It's me." He does not. He builds the case slowly, Genesis to Malachi. Every shadow and type and prophecy that had been pointing toward a suffering Messiah for centuries, and Luke alone, among the 4 gospel writers, shows Jesus speaking this explicitly about a Messiah who had to suffer before entering glory. This was not the Messiah anyone in Israel had been expecting. And Jesus spends the walk home rebuilding their entire framework for what they thought they knew. By the time they reach the edge of the village, something has shifted in them. Though they do not have words for it yet, later they will say to each other, "Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us on the road?" Burning hearts, and still closed eyes. They are nearing Emmaus now. The sun is dropping toward the hills. The walk has done something to them that they cannot yet name. Hearts burning, minds reorganizing everything they thought they understood about how this story was supposed to end. And the village is just ahead. This is the moment where the stranger could simply continue on. He has walked 7 miles with them. He has every reason to keep going, and they have no claim on him beyond ordinary hospitality. And Luke records something almost too small to notice if you are not paying close attention. Jesus acts as if he is going farther. Pay attention to this detail because it tells you something about how he operates that you will see again and again if you start looking for it. He does not assume the invitation. He does not linger at the edge of the village hoping they will ask. He makes a motion, continues walking, as though Emmaus is simply a point on his own journey and not his destination, and waits to see what they will do with the time they have had together. This is the resurrected Lord of the universe. He has already defeated the grave. He could appear in glory at this exact moment and remove every shred of doubt instantly. He could simply announce himself and watch them fall to their knees. Instead, he keeps walking as if to leave, and they stop him. "Stay with us," they say, "since it is getting late. The day is almost over." That is the entire invitation, not theological, not even particularly personal, just ordinary hospitality extended to a stranger who has been good company on a hard road, the kind of thing decent people did in the ancient world as a matter of course. They are not inviting him in because they recognize who he is. They are inviting him in because it is late, the road back out is dangerous, and he has been kind to them. He goes home with them. Here is what most people miss about this moment, and it is worth sitting with longer than the size of the verse suggests. The God who spoke the universe into being, who walked out of a sealed tomb under his own power, who has already conquered the single greatest enemy human beings have ever faced, that God will not force his way into a house. He will not insist on the relationship. He will not make himself known whether they want him or not. He waits to be asked. This is not a new pattern for him. Think about every encounter you have ever heard of where Jesus shows up. He does not break down doors. Even now, resurrected, glorified, having walked through death itself and come out the other side, the pattern has not changed. He approaches, he walks alongside, he offers himself, and then he waits for the door to open. Think about what this means for the way you have been picturing how God moves toward people. There is a temptation to imagine that if God wanted to make himself completely undeniable to someone, he simply would. That resurrection power means the removal of all need for human response, all need for invitation, all space for someone to say yes or no. But that is not what happens on the Emmaus road. The most powerful display of divine power in human history, a man walking alive after being certifiably, publicly, thoroughly dead, still respects the threshold of an ordinary house. He still waits for stay with us. This should change something in you if you have ever wondered why God feels distant in a season of your life. It is worth asking honestly, have you said the words? Have you actually invited him in? Or have you been walking beside him in your own grief and confusion without ever saying the three words that changed everything for two people on a road to Emmaus? The two disciples did not get the miracle of recognition on the road. They got it because at the edge of the village, with the sun going down, they said three words that changed everything. Stay with us. He always could have walked on. He chooses to stay only when he is wanted. This is the same character you will see throughout every gospel account, but it lands differently here after the resurrection, because the stakes could not be lower for him and could not be higher for them. He has nothing left to prove by staying. He has already won, and he stays anyway, not because he needs the meal or the shelter, but because he honors the invitation of two grieving people who, without knowing it, are about to receive the answer to every prayer they have prayed since Friday. They sit down at the table, and what happens next will take seconds, just seconds, but it will be the hinge on which the rest of their lives turns. The table is small. The house is poor. This is not a banquet. It is the simplest meal imaginable, the kind shared in countless homes across first century Judea every single night. Bread, maybe a little wine, two tired travelers, and the stranger they invited in out of kindness, settling in for the evening. And then he reaches for the bread. Luke records the moment with 4 verbs in sequence. And if you know your scripture even a little, the rhythm of those 4 verbs should stop you cold. He takes the bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. He gives it to them. Take, bless, break, give. This is not the first time these two disciples have watched someone perform this exact sequence of actions. It is the same sequence Jesus used 3 days earlier. In an upper room with bread he said was his body given for them. It is the same sequence he used on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee, when 5 loaves became enough to feed 5,000 people with baskets left over. Take, bless, break, give. The same hands, the same rhythm, the same gesture that, if you had watched him do it even once before, you would recognize instantly the moment you saw it again. And that is exactly what happens. Luke writes it in 5 words that contain the entire hinge of the chapter. Their eyes were opened, not during the 7-mile walk, not during the rebuke about foolishness and slowness to believe, not even during the patient unfolding of Moses and the prophets, the burning heart Bible study that should have told them everything they needed to know. All of that prepared the ground. None of it broke it open. It breaks open at the bread. Notice what this means. The disciples spent an entire walk in the literal presence of the risen Christ, close enough to touch him, close enough to hear every word. And recognition did not come from proximity. It did not come from information, even the best information, even scripture rightly explained by the one who fulfilled it. It came from a familiar gesture, repeated in an ordinary moment, in a poor house, over a simple meal. The most theologically rich resurrection appearance in the New Testament hinges on someone breaking bread the way he always broke bread. And the instant they see him, the very instant, he is gone. He vanishes from their sight. Here is what most people miss about this, and it matters more than almost anything else in the story. Jesus does not linger to enjoy the moment of recognition. He does not stay for the embrace, the explanation, the questions that must have been flooding into both of their minds in that half second. The moment they know him, he is gone, as if the seeing itself was the entire point, and once it had happened, nothing else needed to be added. You might expect grief at this, a second loss, layered on top of the first. He was just here. He was just recognized. And now he is gone again. But that is not what happens. They do not sit in stunned silence, mourning his disappearance. Luke tells us what they do instead, and the urgency of it should not be lost on you. That very hour, not the next morning, not after a night's rest, not once it felt safer. That very hour, dark as it was, late as it was, dangerous as the 7-mile road back to Jerusalem certainly was, they got up and returned at once. They run back into the same darkness they had just walked out of, because something had happened at that table that made the danger of the road irrelevant. When they arrive, they find the 11 and the others already gathered, already saying to each other, "It is true, the Lord has risen." Simon Peter, it turns out, has already seen him too. And Cleopas and his companion add their own testimony to the growing chorus. And Luke records the specific phrase they used to describe what convinced them. He was known to us in the breaking of the bread, not in the argument, not in the proof, not in the angels or the empty tomb, in the breaking of the bread. Now step back and look at what this story has actually been building toward. The first thing the risen Jesus does with 2 grieving disciples is not unveil himself in glory. It is walk beside them in disguise, long enough to hear their whole story before he says a word. The first thing he asks for is not worship. It is an invitation into an ordinary house for an ordinary night. The moment he chooses to reveal himself is not a thunderclap. It is a familiar gesture at a simple table, repeated exactly as he had always done it, so that 2 broken-hearted people would know him not by spectacle, but by the shape of his hands. This is who he is. This is how he has always moved toward people. This is apparently how he intends to keep moving toward people, even after death itself could not hold him. There are 3 things I want you to carry out of this. The first is this: the resurrection's first great revelation was not cosmic. It was domestic. Not a parted sky, not an army of angels, not a public unveiling in the temple courts where his enemies could see and be shamed. A table in a poor house in a village most people have never heard of. If you have been waiting for God to prove himself to you with something enormous and undeniable, you may be missing him at the size he most often chooses to show up in. An ordinary moment, a familiar gesture, a meal shared with someone who is more present than you realize. The second is this: he waits to be invited, even after rising from the dead. He did not force his way into that house any more than he forces his way into yours. The disciples had to say, "Stay with us," before anything else could happen. If you have felt his absence, it is worth asking honestly whether you have actually opened the door, or whether you have been walking beside him in your own grief and confusion without ever saying the three words that changed everything for two people on a road to Emmaus. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with longest: real recognition always produces urgency. The moment their eyes opened, Cleopas and his companion did not stay seated. They got up immediately in the dark on a dangerous road because what they had just seen could not wait until morning. If you have truly recognized him, if your own eyes have ever been opened at your own table, in your own ordinary moment, you will not be able to stay seated either. You will find yourself moving, telling, running back into whatever darkness stands between you and the people who need to hear what you now know. He was known to them in the breaking of the bread. He is still known that way, in ordinary moments, in familiar gestures, in meals shared with people who do not yet realize who is sitting across from them. The resurrection did not change the way Jesus moves toward the world. It confirmed it. He comes close. He waits to be wanted. And when he is finally seen, he does not linger for applause. Because by then, the only response that means anything is the response of two people running through the dark, unable to keep what they have found to themselves. If this video meant something to you, leave a comment below with the words, "Stay with us." Just that. 3 words. The same 3 words that changed everything for 2 grieving disciples on a road they thought led only to more sorrow. And if you know someone who is walking their own road away from Jerusalem right now, someone whose hope feels buried, who has heard reports they cannot quite believe, share this with them. Not because it will answer every question, but because sometimes recognition does not come from more information. It comes from staying at the table a little longer. We will see you in the next one.